Good morning. It's Sunday, July 10th, and this is the Georgia Gang. I'm Russ Spencer in for Lori Geary. The Fulton County DA wants her special grand jury to hear from Rudy Giuliani and others close to former President Trump regarding falsehoods they spread about the voter fraud in the 2020 election. A bomb destroys the 19-foot Guidestones in East Georgia, revered by some as an American Stonehenge and reviled by others, including a former candidate for governor, as satanic. And Georgia Democrats campaign for an earlier slot on the presidential primary calendar. Melita, Phil, Theron, and Janelle are in today. The debate and discussion begin right now.
From the Fox 5 studios, the Georgia Gang starts now.
The special grand jury investigating whether anyone broke the law in Fulton County by interfering in the last presidential election subpoenaed 7 people close to former President Trump this week, including Trump's personal lawyer, Rudy Giuliani. And DA Fani Willis says she has not ruled out a subpoena for Donald Trump himself. In late 2020, Giuliani testified before a Georgia legislative committee claiming tens of thousands of illegal votes had been cast in the state's election.
It's your responsibility if a false and fraudulent count is submitted to the United States government. And it is clear that the count you have right now is false.
Giuliani also told lawmakers, not under oath by the way, that poll workers mishandled ballots and rigged voting machines against Trump, false claims that prompted New York State to suspend his law license. Now, South Carolina U.S. Senator Lindsey Graham said this week he will fight what he calls a fishing expedition. Graham allegedly made 2 calls to Georgia Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger asking whether he had the power to reject absentee ballots. Graham has denied any wrongdoing. As the potential witnesses prepare their legal responses to the subpoenas, Fulton County DA Fani Willis told NBC News this week, "I think that people thought that we came into this as some kind of game. This is not a game at all. What I'm doing is very serious." For his part, the former president defended himself Thursday on his social media platform, writing, "I did nothing wrong in Georgia, but others did. They cheated in the 2020 presidential election, and those are the ones that should be investigated and prosecuted." The former president also repeated his claim that his call to Brad Raffensperger was perfect. So let's bring in the panel. I guess the 2 big questions are, will we hear these people testify? Obviously, there's going to be some legal wrangling about that. And how much jeopardy might they and perhaps the former president be in? Theron, what do you think?
Well, I think what's very clear to me, Russ, is that, when this all happened in November and then January 6th, it was a clear effort that Donald Trump felt like he was cheated and he lost the election. And Georgia was front and center of pretty much a majority of his claims of false voting and tampering with the votes. But what it also shows me is what Fani Willis said, is that, and we've been wondering how far she was going to go with this. And she said, this is not a game. This is very serious. So I do think that these people who have been subpoenaed, they do have the right to file legal challenges to the subpoena. But ultimately, I think the people of Georgia deserve the right to hear, what was your intent when you made those calls? What are the facts that you had at your disposal at the time when you made these false claims? And so I think ultimately it'll get caught up in legal battles. But ultimately, I do think that Fani Willis is doing exactly what she said she's going to do. She's going to investigate this to the fullest. And I do think if you've been subpoenaed, you do have the right to legally challenge that, but ultimately you need to come and share the information you had at the time. All right,
well, you used the word intent. Janelle, one of the questions is, did the president believe what he was saying about voter fraud in Georgia?
You know what, I don't know whether he did or didn't. I know what he said, so I go with that. But here's the thing, when it comes to Fani Willis, when she ran for this seat, there was a lot of bipartisan support for her seat. And I think that what we're seeing now is her being really very, very partisan. I'm trying to figure out what the outcome is going to be of this and what is it going to mean to people. If you're spending tax dollars to prove a point, I don't think that's going to matter much when you have so much going on with the economy and things that other people are struggling with. So and accusations and claims is not a criminal offense. So I'm really concerned about what the direction this is going and whether or not we're just wasting money. That is my concern with this.
All right. I'm interested in your take on this, Melita, and also address the idea that there's not attorney-client privilege, as I understand it, if what they were discussing is potentially against the law. Go ahead.
True. There are several points to follow up on. First, the people will not hear what is said behind the closed doors of this special grand jury room. The only way we will know what testimony is given behind those closed doors is if there's a leak, which Fani Willis has kept that thing pretty tightly closed up. But secondly, to say that she's being partisan, when the special grand jury was approved by all of the Fulton County judges, many of whom were appointed by Republican governors, would be erroneous. And then I do believe that it's very interesting that the one judge has already said that certain state legislators, including Lieutenant Governor Jeff Duncan, must answer the subpoena, although he put boundaries around what could be said. So certainly this is something that will play out in the courts, and I think Senator Lindsey Graham from South Carolina is one of the first in line saying that he will fight the subpoena. But I think it's going to be very interesting to see how this plays out, and it will be, once this goes further, if it does, interesting to see what some of these people say under oath. I mean, poor Lindsey Graham, I think he can't remember what he said from one time to another because he so often contradicts himself. So to put him under oath and hear what he has to say will be very interesting.
Phil, we hear the former president is thinking about declaring early for 24, so it would strengthen his argument that this is all political.
Well, I'd like to comment on all of the Fulton County judges that signed off on this no. I happen to know about 4 Superior Court judges that voted no not to do this grand jury, so let's correct the record there. Absolutely. But Russ, let me just say this. I can't help but think back to 2018 when Stacey Abrams said these machines were rigged and this election was stolen, et cetera, et cetera. The Democrats kept saying that for a year. Now, let's say they were sincere in that. You have a right to your opinion. You have a right to question irregularities after every election, especially in 2020, 2021. You had problems with drop boxes. You had signature verification problems. You had that delay of the vote count in Fulton County. So I think the Republicans have every right to ask questions. Lindsey Graham is on the Judiciary Committee. He has every right to find out what's going on in Georgia, what's going on in these other states. And so I think that this is their First Amendment right to question. Now, is it false? Is it correct? You have a right to having a wrong opinion. And so, again, you've heard me say this. It's a waste of time and resources. You got 11,000 criminal cases that are backlogged. That's what Fani Willis ought to be focusing on. Let other venues handle Donald Trump.
All right, quick last word on this. I want to move on.
What I think is erroneous is to utilize the actions of others to justify one individual. What I'm saying is that I think Fani Willis calling this or bringing this to the table is what's partisan. And I do think it is because it's a direct attack on President Trump. And I do think that overall, like I said, what is going to be the outcome? That's the question we have to ask. What happens at the end of this? Even if they find him guilty, this is not a crime. There's no criminal case here. So this, again, is a waste of time.
All right. I want to move on to a big and bizarre story in Georgia this week. The GBI investigating the early morning explosion on Wednesday of this week that severely damaged the Georgia Guidestones north of Elberton in East Georgia. The rest of the granite monument had to be taken down later that day. It was built back in 1980 with inscriptions in 8 languages regarding, quote, the conservation of mankind. One of the tenets calls for limiting the human population to 500 million to live in harmony with nature. And of course, the current world population is closing in on 8 billion now. And in early May, former candidate for Governor Candace Taylor tweeted, "I'm the only candidate bold enough to stand up to the Luciferian cabal. Elect me governor of Georgia, and I will bring the satanic regime to its knees and demolish the Georgia Guidestones." And then after the explosion this week, she tweeted, "God is God all by himself. He can do anything he wants. That includes striking down satanic Guidestones." Where do we begin with this, Melita?
Well, I think it's very interesting that this happened. It is probably more of a crime. It could mean that the person who did it could end up in prison for 20 years, I believe, because it's on public property.
Right.
And it's a historic structure. It had been controversial, but it's a big part of the tourist industry for that area of town. I mean, one convenience store operator said 1/3 of his business came from people going to see the Guidestones. It brings about 22,000 people a year. So it's going to be very interesting to see if the locals wish to rebuild this. And I think it'll be very interesting to see how quickly they can find the perpetrator, because if this was a bomb made with the substances used in mining and construction operations are usually kept under lock and key and carefully signed in and out. So it might give the GBI just a little bit of a head start on tracking it down.
All right, Phil, Candace Taylor got 3.4% of the vote in the primary for governor, but that's about 41,000 votes. Is this a fringe point of view that she's proposing at this point, or is it becoming less fringe?
Well, I don't know. If it was a blow against Satan, we're all against Satan here, but I have no idea. She obviously has her point of view. We can laugh about that. I don't know who blew it up. I'm interested in finding out what the GBI says too.
Well, she claims if there's not video that she thinks that God did it, although she's made it clear she's against vandalism and would not have. Go ahead. Do you want to say something about
that? I do want to say something as a Republican, right, or a conservative, is that, I want us to be careful when it comes to hypocrisy, right? Because I know that we took a strong stand against, the statutes and making sure that we preserve history regardless of what the past is. And so when I saw this, that was the first thing I said, and I believe that integrity matters. So I think that, if we're going to push for, blowing up statues of any sort, or supporting that, we have to make sure that we're doing it on both sides. Now, I think I am for preserving history, even if you do not agree with it. And to Melita's point, if this is something that was bringing tourism to this area, and my husband and I traveled in every county, and I know a lot of these small towns need this, I think we need to keep that in mind.
All right. Coming up, Republicans accuse Senator Raphael Warnock of a campaign finance violation, using campaign money to respond to a lawsuit that predates his political career. His team responds.
Have a question or comment for the Georgia Gang? Email them at georgiagang@foxtv.com.
Governor Kemp raised almost $7 million from the beginning of May to the end of June for his rematch with Stacey Abrams. And as of this taping, Abrams has not released her most recent numbers, but she raised almost $12 million from February through April. And while we're talking about money, Georgia has gotten another $2.4 billion in federal COVID relief funds, even though the state had a healthy $3.7 billion budget surplus last year and expects another one this year. That gives Governor Kemp an opportunity to perhaps give Georgians another refund check before the November election. Stacey Abrams would like to spend that more on programs. What's the state of the race as you see it, Theron?
I mean, this is a significant fundraising quarter for the governor. I mean, look, for him to basically be able to run against Stacey Abrams, who I think will have, if not exactly the same amount he's raised for this quarter, maybe more, he's got to basically be able to have the money to promote his message and why he should be reelected. The other thing that's very interesting, Russ, there is that a lot of us are wondering what is the governor going to do with the $2 million that's left over from COVID. Now, this is a bipartisan plea on my part. I think that we all agree that there's a lot of efforts out there that have left people in very tough times post-COVID, right? There's a lot of things that I think that the governor can do for this state that's not necessarily political, but ultimately can help everyone in the state. But ultimately, look, the governor, from what I hear from Republicans, and Phil and Janelle know this better than me, is that he's relentless on the phones. He's calling in all the favors. He's making sure that people understand that he needs a well-funded campaign account to try to, go up against Stacey Abrams.
Phil, what's your take on where we are?
Well, Theron has made some good points, and I think we've talked about this before. I think that this could be the most expensive governor's race and Senate race in the country. I think it's a swing state. I don't think it's a blue state. I think it's a swing state. But I do think that you're going to see more and more ads. You're starting to see the ad wars right now. We talked about last week Warnock and Walker in the U.S. Senate race. I noticed the PACs that are in favor of Herschel Walker are now coming out with some negative stuff. They actually had Senator Tim Scott, the black senator from South Carolina, endorsing Herschel. So I think we're gonna know a lot more as the next few weeks come by as to see how, is this even, who's up, who's down.
All right. Speaking of federal money, Hartsfield-Jackson Airport will be getting $40 million to renovate Concourse D, part of the $1.2 trillion bipartisan infrastructure plan. 85 airports around the country will share about $1 billion for upgrades. Melita, what do you think about that? Is this money well spent?
Well, it's certainly well spent at Hartsfield, and I think that's just the down payment on the total project, and the money will continue to be doled out over 5 years. And so I expect that Atlanta will be applying for more of this money later on. but it's certainly money well spent because Hartsfield is one of the busiest airports in the world, and that Concourse D is pretty dramatically smaller than the others.
What do you think about this government spending?
You know what? I'm watching it because I do think that the federal government is spending a lot of money that we don't have, and that's a concern. However, I want to applaud Mayor Dickens for the actions that they're taking in this. I do think the expansion is needed. It is a small area, and so I'm looking forward to seeing how it turns around and what type of return on the investment we get.
You want a piece on this?
Yeah, real quick, big shout out to Mayor Dickens, but more importantly, John Ossoff and Nikema Williams, our Congresswoman Williams, and Senator Ossoff came together to utilize this federal funding that's coming from President Biden to improve the world's busiest and most efficient airport.
Okay. Republicans accused Senator Raphael Warnock of a campaign finance violation, saying he used campaign funds to defend himself from a lawsuit that dates back to issues long before he was a senator. The lawsuit itself seems frivolous. Questions about personal belongings being lost in a storage locker and about a man feeling uncomfortable at one of Warnock's church services back in 2005. A federal judge dismissed it outright, but the man filed it again in April of 2021 after Warnock joined the Senate. And the Warnock campaign points out that the handwritten lawsuit was served to him at his Senate office in Atlanta, along with several others, including a former mayor. So what do you think about all this, Phil? Is this a fair criticism on the Republicans' part?
I don't know if it's frivolous or not, but that's why you have investigations. It's an allegation, yes, but from the lawyers I've talked to, he could be in trouble because it looked like he was using the campaign donors' money for a personal use. I don't know. His defense so far hasn't been. Now, some of the other things you're bringing up, I don't know about, but I think that's the nut of the problem, and we'll have to see what happens.
What do you think, Melina?
Some of the other government officials who were also served with the same frivolous lawsuit used government attorneys to defend them in the lawsuit. I think the Republicans want to do anything they can to distract from Senator Warnock's record of accomplishment, particularly this last week when he was able to make headway on capping insulin at $35 a month for people with diabetes. And Darren just mentioned the airport. He's also been doing a lot to keep the Savannah Combat Readiness Training Center open. So Republicans are going to distract from his strong record in their efforts to help their candidate Walker.
Where do you think Herschel Walker stands at this point?
Ooh, good, interesting question. So, and I say that because of the fact that I know there's a lot that's come out, a lot of accusations, and I think what matters is what is going to hit the people, right? Something that Kelvin says to me all the time is that when people are hurting, they want remedies and cures. They don't want to talk about the symptoms, and I think there's a lot of symptoms being discussed, right? The accusations around Walker, the accusations around Warnock. I think it speaks to the there are 44% of Democrats, there are 49% of Republicans, but there are 7% of undecideds that want to hear about solutions and not all of the symptoms and the accusations. So I think
it's something to motivate them to come out and vote in the first place, too.
Absolutely, absolutely. I think we got to make sure that, and when I read articles and I see these things, I immediately start to process, how is this going to transfer over to voters? And that's the part that I think about. And I don't know if either is enough to really get the undecided.
All right, thank you. Coming up, Georgia Democrats want a bigger say in who the next nominee for president will be. We'll talk about that when we come back.
Join the discussion on the Georgia Gang Facebook page and watch past episodes on the Georgia Gang YouTube channel.
Georgia Democrats are making a pitch to move the state's presidential primary closer to the front of the line in 2024. 17 states and territories, in fact, are making their cases to the Democratic National Committee, which would like to start the process in a state that represents the party more fully than mostly white, mostly rural Iowa. It didn't work out so well there in 2020. In a video, Congresswoman Nikema Williams says, who is the Georgia State Party chair, says our racial, geographic, and economic diversity is not just a stat, it is our strength. So, Melita, what do you think? Would it make a big deal to move this up?
It would make a big deal. It would bring national and international attention to Georgia. And Congresswoman Williams is very correct. There are certain places in Georgia, for example, Forsyth County, by percentage, has more AAPI population than LA County, California. So there are certain places in Georgia that are far more diverse than any other place in the nation. And so to focus that attention on our state would be good for economic development. That would please Republicans. And I think it would be good for business. And I think it's very interesting that also Democrats are trying to have the Democratic convention here in 2024 as well.
Well, all eyes have been on Georgia, obviously, for the last couple of years. What do you think of this prospect, Phil?
Well, I think it's great when either party can have something here in the state of Georgia, and I'm in favor of showcasing the state too. And if the Democrats do get an early primary, we can see how the fight develops between the regular liberal Democrats and the socialists and the Bernie Sanders type. So we can sit back, Theron, with our popcorn as Republicans and see what happens there.
Theron?
There are some moderate Democrats out there, Phil.
Are they? Well, okay.
You know, no, I think it's a big deal, and I think, you know, compliment to the Democratic Party of Georgia, Congresswoman Nikema Williams, who's also the chair. She shares that dual role. But what I liked about the video, Russ, is that exactly what you said. We're now a state of 11 million people. We are like the center of who's going to be in power in Washington. And then lastly, I think that it does need to be reflective of the entire country. No offense to Iowa and New Hampshire, but as you pointed out, is that it's majority white, 2 states, and I think you don't get to places like South Carolina until like number 4 or 5. So I think moving Georgia up and putting us up there with maybe the, you know, sort of big 11 states that early on the process will be a good reflection of who the Democratic nominee he or she should be. And I think the South has got something to say. We deserve to be moved up in the schedule.
Do you want a quick word on this one?
Yeah, I just think it's interesting because I've never been able to understand how the color of your skin has anything to do with your politics. I mean, I think I'm a prime example of that. It's that there's always this assumption that I'm supposed to be a Democrat simply because I have a little more melanin. And I think that's a little bizarre to me. So I think that we need to make sure that we keep the focus on politics and not always turn it towards race and diversity.
All right. Thank you for that. No word yet on whether the Fulton County DA will retry Tex Mciver for murder. His 2018 conviction for the shooting death of his wife Diane was overturned by the Georgia Supreme Court about 10 days ago. The unanimous opinion said jurors should have been allowed to consider involuntary manslaughter since the evidence Mciver intended to kill his wife, quote, was not overwhelming or even strong. She was in the front seat of an SUV, you'll remember, when he shot her from the back seat. A Superior Court judge upheld the murder conviction just this time last summer. I know that you have some opinions about this, Phil.
Well, yes, and of course that was a very high-profile case after the killing in 2016, and everybody was riveted to the courtroom. I think the big loser here was Superior Court Judge in Fulton County, McBurney. He was torn apart in this unanimous opinion that you were talking about.
He's the one who upheld it a year ago, last summer. Yeah.
That's correct, and the Chief Justice Mike Boggs just tore him a big one, saying the evidence was, quote, very thin, unquote, to have the conviction. So yes, you're right. The big question is, will DA Fonnie Willis, who's got a lot on her plate, will she retry Mciver?
I got 30 seconds, Melita.
Well, the Supreme Court cut out a lot of the evidence that was used in the previous trial in their very long opinion, but it's very interesting to me that her former colleagues have a big billboard in LaCorey Tower right at the downtown connector in I-20 where both members of the Supreme Court and the Fonnie Willis staff will see that they're pleading for justice for Diane.
Interesting. Melita, thank you for that. And we'll be back. Winners and losers are next.
Time now for the week's winners and losers.
All right, let's start at this side of the table this week. Janelle?
All right, wonderful. My winners this week is Attorney General Chris Carr. He was the first ever gang prosecution unit took effect this month, and I thought that was a perfect example of remedying the pain versus and coming up with a solution. I also want to give a shout out to my good friend Quatanda Armstrong. I call her Q. She's opened up the first African-American women-owned business in Lumpkin County. She also has really awesome concealed carry purses. And please join the Cobb County GOP on July 16th. My good friend Marcy McCarthy is the Cobb County chair there. It's at Heritage Golf Links. This is going to be a special day for her as well.
So you're a Q supporter is what you're saying. I'm just teasing you.
All right. My first winner is going to be Zenobia Hayes, who was just recently announced as Senator Warnock's political director. Next, I want to make Brenda Muhammad a winner. She found the Atlanta Victims and Assistance Program, a nonprofit organization that serves victims of crime for over 30 years. She's retiring this week, so I want to make her a winner. And also want to say hello to Leslie and Walter Kurtz. Russ, I met them at the Beloved event this week, and they said said they're big fans of the show. And then shout out to Rodney Bullard, Dan Cathy, Arthur Blank. They raised over $6.2 million at the Beloved event that will go directly towards the west side of Atlanta. So I want to make them a winner as well.
That's great stuff. Phil?
Well, I want to make Walt Cusick, who is the commander of Post 29 American Legion over in Marietta, Georgia. He was named by the whole department for the state of Georgia for the American Legion as the Legionnaire of the Year. It's the biggest post in Georgia, and they do a lot of great work to help veterans. And secondly, probably we could make him, all of us, a winner, is City Councilman in Atlanta, Dustin Hillis. What he did, he was in a police ride-along right by our state capitol, and a man had collapsed on the sidewalk, and he just, the instinct just kicked in. He's a certified nurse. He saved the man's life.
How about that?
So he's a winner.
That's fantastic. We all agree.
Agree.
My winner is former President Jimmy Carter and his lovely wife Rosalind, who celebrated their 76th wedding anniversary earlier this week.
It's amazing.
The longest marriage presidential couple in U.S. history, and he says that's his greatest accomplishment in life, marrying Rosalind, and that's certainly the foundation for a long-lasting marriage. My loser is the hapless Savannah area man on the run from law enforcement who waded into a pond with alligators. Fortunately for him, the television news crew helicopters scared away the alligators, but the policeman waited him out.
Television news to the rescue.
Yes.
Glad he's okay.
And Russ, can we give a big shout out to Portia Bruner, who is actually launching her daily talk show called Portia. So Portia, want to make her winner as well.
I wanted to mention that Q's boutique is called Exclusive Boutique, so that you can go and actually visit it.
All right. Fox News Sunday is next. Lori will be back next week.